Our next episode on our instructional series is on clutch rebuilds. I hope you just watched our first video on clutches, on how to mount them, and how to do maintenance on the clutch. This is gonna go into all the cool clutch rebuilding, which sucks. You know, clutch building's a lot like building a lasagna. You gotta do layer by layer, and it takes forever, and it's really not worth it unless you're good at rebuilding a clutch or making a lasagna. Because if you're not good, it just sucks. You just messed up. It's ruined for everyone. Okay, looking at rebuilding a clutch, you need to use the clutch rebuilding tool. This is fairly easy to use. You unscrew it, put the clutch on top, line up the holes, put that in, grab an 8mm T-handle, and screw in. Now you want to screw until it is tight. You don't want to over tighten it because you'll start bending things out of place. But you want to go until you can just about can't go anymore by hand. Once it's tightened, the lever pins and the weights should be free to remove as such. Sometimes it takes a bit of wiggling, but they should come out relatively easy. So once you take the weights out, you can now take all the lever pins out. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass to take the lever pins out, and I like to use either a pick or a small hex key or flathead to help get them out. Okay, with all the lever pins taken out, you can now check them for wear. You'll see different grooves on. I always recommend putting new lever pins in if you're going to rebuild, but in a pinch you can always reuse. Now you can loosen up the clutch tool and the clutch should come apart. With the clutch tool removed, the lever pins are now, or the lever straps are now loose, and you can start disassembling the clutch. The lever straps don't usually experience that much wear, and sometimes they'll just bend out of shape. You can correct this by just bending them sometimes, but typically they're pretty good, at least to my knowledge. With the clutch disassembled, you can now check each component for wear. Most of the specs for each component are in the L&T Wet Clutch manual, which can be found online, or we have paper copies in the shop. To start, you can check your friction discs. First, you can visually just look at the condition of the discs. Typically, there will start to be some cracking or some degradation on the grids here. Here we can see some wear. This is an example of a completely worn pad. Notice how thin it is and also just the condition on the surface. There's no cross-hatching anymore, and it's pretty much chewed up. To check the condition of the friction pads, you want to measure with a pair of calipers the thickness. To check the thickness of the friction pad, you take the friction pad, take your calipers, and you want to measure in inches. If it goes below 0.085, then the pad needs to be replaced. You want to check in multiple locations to take kind of an average of the pad. If it's below 0.085, then replace the pad. If it's close, that's a judgment call. Most of the time they're around 0.09 or just slightly under. This one's good. To check for the floaters conditions, visually inspect the floaters, and you want to check that if they're warped or not. To check to see if the floaters are warped, put them on a flat surface and make sure the warpage does not exceed 0.01 of an inch. If it's warped that much, replace them. I've never had to replace a floater disc, but I've had issues before, so maybe these were the cause. Don't know. Looking at the pressure plate, this is also what you want to check for warpage. The same threshold of 0.01 of an inch. When you receive the clutch, it'll have only been installed on one side. To lengthen the life of the pressure plate, when you rebuild it, you can always flip it over. As you can tell, this clutch has already been rebuilt and has wear on both sides. Looking at the spring cups and the spring cups relatively have just some wear on the bottom, but they're not an integral part of the clutch for wear, and so they'll be fine to reuse. The springs you want to check not only if they're broken, but their length and if there's warpage at all. Throughout use, the springs will condense down and become shorter. This is an example of a worn spring. Look how much shorter it is compared to a new spring. So make sure you check the springs to make sure they're not shortened and that they're fully operational. The main flywheel will also experience negligible wear. This should be completely fine to reuse. The lever weights are going to have some wear on them. Honestly, I don't think it makes that big of a deal. I would just reuse them. Make sure to give every part a good clean with brake clean before reassembling. So now, after disassembling and cleaning, we can go ahead and start to reassemble with new parts and with our clean parts. To start, make sure you have the central hub and the flywheel together. It's always easier to actually rebuild with this together and facing down. Next, you want to start putting the spring cups in with the correct orientation, such that the flattened groove lies against the central hub. Now, once that's in, I always like to give just a little bit of clutch fluid into each cup to make sure it's lubed up. It's okay if you make a little bit of a mess here. Next, you got to put your adjusting screws in. This can be difficult as you got to line up the hex of the nut with the hex on the inside of the spring cup. Once all the adjustment screws are in the spring cup, you can go ahead and start putting in your springs. There's no real orientation with the springs that are needed, just make sure that they're all of good quality. I also like to give another dab of clutch oil onto each spring just to make sure it's all lubed up. Can never go wrong with enough lube. Next, it's time to start assembling with the friction pads and the floaters. So pretty simple. Take a friction pad, then take a floater. I like to alternate with the floater directions. Each floater has 3 rails that it uses to glide on the spring cups. So I like to alternate, so I have 3 on 3, and then this set I'll do on the other 3 to ride on. And you just sandwich the layers. Nothing much else to it. You finish by putting on the flywheel, or the pressure plate. Make sure to line up the pressure plate holes with the springs. Next, you can add your lever straps. Sometimes these can be a pain to put in, but it's all good. Now here comes the annoying bit. Take your clutch tool and you've got to flip the clutch onto here without the lever straps wanting to fall out. Shit. I got a couple to fall out. It's much easier when you can use both hands. Ah, shit again. First try. So now you want to compress your clutch again so that we can get the lever pins and the weights back into the clutch. Doodly doodly doo. So once tightened, you got to put all your lever pins back in. This is a pain in the ass. Sometimes when one's stuck like this, I take the 8mm Allen wrench that I'm using and I lightly tap it in with both sides. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Either way, I want to kill myself. With all the lever pins installed, I like to take some more clutch fluid and just lube up each lever pin. This helps the weights slide on a little bit easier and just make sure that there's a thin film of lubrication with the weights. The weights should just slide back in. The weights should just slide back in. Make sure you group them in pairs of 3. To make sure they're in all the way, make sure they've surpassed the lip. To make sure that they're in all the way, make sure they've surpassed the lip on the flywheel and they can move somewhat freely. In this case, these don't want to go in, mainly because the left side of the pin doesn't want to float up in. What you can do is take a screwdriver and pop that side up, Or take that lever pin or the lever strap and use some pliers and squeeze the lever pin or the lever strap in to bend it back into spec. Now, with all the weights in and pins, you can loosen up the clutch tool. With the clutch tool removed, you now have a fully rebuilt clutch. Make sure to check the air gap, which is the gap between the disc and the pressure plate, or when they're slid to one side. You should soak the clutch overnight or 24 hours, or at least for an hour or two before using it. So yeah, that's how you rebuild a clutch, I think. I'm not an expert. I self-taught myself. And I've not been super successful. But knowledge is knowledge. See you in the next episode.